Thank you, Girish. First of all, I want to first thank everyone here for joining us, and also to Flosum, Shekhar, as well as Girish and everybody else, the people who are here, the people who are also behind the scenes, Lauren and others. Big shout out to them because a lot of hard work went into kind of getting this all together, and especially in the Salesforce Tower here in the middle of TDX. So you can imagine the craziness. My name is Dipanker. I go by DJ. I have been with sales. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem since the 2000s. I have X number of certifications. I'm unsure, how many after the AI associate certification. But I just remember that my architect ones are valid. So that's all counts, right? One thing that really brought me a little bit more attention than I often need is this book called Salesforce Architect's Handbook, which was written with me and my very best friend and colleague at IBM, Jim Hutcherson. And this book was a culmination of almost 2 decades of my experience with Salesforce implementation, as well as 2 decades of Jim's experience with Salesforce implementation. And initially, when we were trying to write this book about Salesforce, we were both studying for our CTA exam and other things. And we just realized that we were exploring so many different information, not only just in DevOps, which we'll come to in a little bit, but other places, so that we brought all of that and organized it in a categorical fashion with all the domain certifications like integrations, identity and access management, and DevOps being one of them, which is a good segue into why I'm here. So, Flosum had asked me, and this is probably the third year in a row, where they asked me to just come and share what does DevOps really mean from a SI partner perspective, from the experience perspective, based on some of the research that I've done in DevOps space for writing this book. If I can share some of that with you guys. So that's my intent today. One thing that I always kind of ask folks is that, what does really DevOps mean? And I get a lot of different answers. It's tools, it's actually agile methodology, it's hybrid methodology, and many other things. But what really DevOps means is or as an architect, when we were researching and we were identifying how do you become a good DevOps architect, and as well as if you're studying for your DevOps certification, architect level certification, it's very important to approach it that way because it's a mile deep, an inch deep and a mile wide, the DevOps. And for that, it's important to understand the mindset behind it, which is that DevOps is actually a culture. It's about people coming together with different skill sets, doing different things that all are absolutely needed, hopefully, and essentially to produce a common result. But most of the times, when we work as an SI partner or even just a project implementation partner, we think of it just as a one-time thing. And this has caused a little bit of a phenomena of a misnomer within the DevOps world. They think like DevOps is like, hey, let's get like some tool, let's put some agile methodology, let's do waterfall, let's do sandbox strategy, copy it from a Google online version, and we are good with DevOps. But I'll show you an example of what could happen if DevOps went wrong, right? It's not that anybody, by the way, whenever this is in my book, and so I just pulled it from my book, but I kind of mentioned that even if I had to really provide the pictures of each one of these to each of the individuals and say, build this for me, the level of authority, like architects being kind of like, how architects behave, right? And especially if you have a CTA or if you've written a book like me, it's like a whole different story, right? But they will kind of express their version. No, the client doesn't know what they want because everybody is Steve Jobs, right? So we kind of provide something like this. And here's the best part. When we have another business idea, we provide another land more, And here's the more interesting part so far in this, what we haven't even covered is the security. Because we are so used to kind of taking each project as a unique project, we oftentimes don't even create the keys for the cars. So we give the lawnmower out to you without any security. It just runs when it runs. If it doesn't run, then put a patch or a new approach to it. And this, I don't think it's because of technical skill set lacking. I don't think it's because of any kind of, it's just that there are multiple steps to DevOps, and when it is mismanaged, this could happen again and again. This becomes a little bit more complicated, and why I'm showing this, and it's not just like a painting in my house, but actually what the left side represents is the nature and the style in which Salesforce is built, which is a metadata-driven multi-tenant architecture. And I always think of it just based on I'll tell you a quick story. Recently, me and my wife moved from Maryland, where we had a single-family house, and we moved over to a condo in Tampa. And there was a lot of lifestyle changes, and my wife never knew like what Salesforce really was. As soon as she moved into Tampa and my condo, and she said like, hey, why can't I do this or do that? And our dog barks, and like, our neighbors complain. And then like, there are some condo rules that we always break, and, we get kind of hit with like some kind of fine regulations and other things. My wife says like, well, you were going to explain me Salesforce. I said, this condo living is Salesforce. Before this, we are all used to kind of building either on-premise or on an IS solution, a monolithic architecture. And sometimes we even call this monolithic architecture just because we're building it on AWS, because we keep extending them without kind of compartmentalizing or organizing them. Now, why I'm bringing all of this stuff up? Because we have rules to follow when we are in a multi-tenant architecture. We have also got rules to follow when it comes to scalability. It also comes with like the idea that this is different than code. Salesforce is not code. Salesforce, the way it works, and there's a lot more in the book, and not that I'm asking anybody to buy my book. If you do, thank you, But the key idea is that, we are DevOps has been built primarily for a community that was writing code in a monolithic architecture, as well as like kind of just committing those things to, a unitenant, single tenant, kind of an environment within the, AWS or any kind of IaaS. When it comes to SaaS, you also have to maintain the context, the metadata, and how they are kind of managed within the DevOps process. So when you apply just a DevOps process that has been applicable throughout the industry into Salesforce, there are a lot more complications that many of my friends in IBM don't understand. Because they're like, hey, like we're IBM, we know like how every technology works. And I oftentimes have to remind my friends, like, no, you don't know Salesforce. And this is the main reason why DevOps is an architectural domain within the Salesforce practice, because it's complex and people always underestimate it. And I wanted to show this because there are governor limits, there are other things, there are tools out there which kind of are not native to Salesforce. And we will talk about why nativeness to Salesforce is kind of a real big advantage because of, the understanding of Salesforce, the capabilities that everything that's your tool, Salesforce has, your DevOps tool also inherits automatically. And it keeps up to date with all the releases and other things. So these are some of the decisions that you start making when you think of yourself living in an apartment versus a single family home. And so hence Salesforce being the apartment. Oh, sorry. There are, of course, two different ways when we're talking about DevOps in Salesforce. Now we know them as like org-driven DevOps, which is our old lifestyle change set. I mean, I say old lifestyle as if like it's already gone. It's still there, But we also have like now Salesforce DX, and then we have Salesforce DevOps Center, which I'll talk about a little bit, but without too much detail, because we're in a Salesforce building. I just don't want to be thrown out so quickly. But two different ways. Org-driven approach, which is essentially you have all the set of your metadata, your code, and all of the capabilities in one of your sandbox orgs, and you kind of archive that for a long time. You maintain that, and you kind of keep refreshing as you kind of keep updating. A lot of nightmare. So we know about that. Source-driven DevOps is where you have like a source code repository with which your Salesforce solution after every development process connects, provides all the metadata out there, and then essentially you are able to kind of interact with it outside offline as well as within the tool or through VS Code. Now, there are some complications around that too, because as I was mentioning, neither of them have matured enough in the DevOps model to really give you all the steps where DevOps goes through in one shot. I want to just kind of quickly, as a check, want to ask anyone over here who can just kind of raise their hand if any of the releases went without any kind of DevOps issues. And I'm telling you, maybe, go for it. Yeah. A major release, not like a change control, like, hey, look, that page layout is not working, boom. You know what I mean? Yeah. I've asked many times, and something as small as, I'll say, like in any of those VS Code tools, even the sequence in which certain data matches with each other, you have to manually kind of move those sequences. And this is something that I also learned from Girish, because we're talking before this. We have to manually merge all of that and do all of this. So you have to know this extra skill, speciality of when that dial turns red or green. The dial of death, as I call it, right? We all stare at it. It's like, oh my God, it's 1 hour and now, boom, oh my God, it was almost there. And we almost feel like it's almost there, but it's never there. Like eventually you like go home and 3 weeks later, you're still seeing the same dial. And now you're like, okay, let's just kind of do a new release completely because this whole thing is bad batch, right? What is happening? We just need to understand that when it comes to Salesforce, it is better to kind of get some more help, get some kind of like services, solutions, other things. This is something that I tell my clients. Many of my clients say like, hey, I'm paying a lot for the tools and other things. One, tool selection is very key, because you want one tool that, is common in terms of like from your CI/CD to your maybe requirements gathering to, deployments, to rollbacks, to backups, and to many other things. And this is kind of key because in the middle of like, even if you're the most skilled architect and CTS, I've seen CTS get nervous when like a client calls and says, pull that back to the earlier version. We can't do the magic, right? And at that time we wish like, oh my God, I wish like there was like a DevOps tool, a DevOps practice. That is when we realize, right? It's like global warming. We're not kind of worried about DevOps until like, we're all burning in heat and like, so like suddenly, it's like COVID or something, So I wanted to kind of bring this out because this may not be as common in a AWS or my Azure version, where you're building a Java application or in a .NET or whatnot, everything. None of that might apply because it's unit-tenant versus multi-tenant, and it's like the source-driven DevOps is still not completely built out for Salesforce. They have to have a new structure, a better structure, like libraries and other things to kind of get there, right? What are some of the challenges in implementing DevOps? And by the way, as I kind of mentioned all the issues, I'll also kind of bring in, these are some of the things I've heard from my clients. Whenever I go and tell them like, hey, why don't you want to have a DevOps tool or like a DevOps practice? Or sometimes I even try to kind of talk to them about, hey, why don't you have a COE? And the COE is recommending that your DevOps practice be more mature. And what does the maturity model look like? Which we'll hear about a little bit more later on. But it's really first the cultural resistance to change. Things are working. It's a hard job. Why do I have to change right now? I was using change set so well, and I'm like a trailhead range, trailhead rover in change set experiences, right? We've got 15 badges. So I don't want to let it go. But now from change set, they said DX. And like half the admins, by the way, this is the funniest thing. Like I was on this project, like they said like, hey, we're going to start using Scratch orgs. Half my admins just left the room. They were like, well, I heard that you can't do Scratch orgs configurability. Like, so I don't know code. I'm walking out, And this was happening all the time until like we kind of created like videos of like go into VS Code, press in this and do that and this and that. And now we have DevOps Center we'll talk about, but still you have to realize like this is not an easy thing. Changing a culture requires years and years, and we are kind of fast forwarding that because it's a solution that is not humanly impacting us, but it is a business solution, right? But we have to treat it as like a human solution. And then we will see like, that things are changing, right? Integration with existing process. I'll kind of keep it a little bit faster. This is kind of key. Uh, too many App Exchange products coming up, but there are also products outside of App Exchange that are getting very important to our clients. They want to integrate with that. They have, everybody has a data warehouse. You have to integrate with that. Everybody has analytical tools. So all of these different parts and the connectors, the adaptability to ensure that we at least get a status of are these systems updated or whatnot, those are key. So they want to make sure that, when there are multiple changes happening to multiple systems, that those are all tracked, because that creates so much anxiety and nervousness within the team that nobody wants to do another project. Most of the PTOs are scheduled around deployments, in that's a common joke in our world. The next one is really like lack of skills and expertise. For example, not that I promised myself not to bring up any company names, including other than thanking Flosum, but Capardo, for example, right? When I was kind of working with a client, a lot of the clients said, "Hey, look, I need somebody who knows Capardo. I need somebody who knows App Omni. I need somebody who knows," and you have to be trained on those, and you get certifications on those and stuff. And I think those are good. But one thing for sure, when you're going from one screen, it's like almost like somebody gives you an Apple and an Android phone and says like, "Hey, some of the phone numbers are in Apple phone and some of them are Android, and start texting your friends with those," right? And you get into the habit of one and the other. And so you can imagine, you as a DevOps manager, you're managing 500 tools, right? So, and also you don't have the skills, and then you can't find a skill. But if it's like a native solution, then you already know Salesforce, and that is a big benefit. This is another part, right? And DevOps rigidity, it's like when there is versatile cloud stack, how much DevOps is a kind of like, I should say it this way. Um, Actually, the best metaphor for this is, I always say that my friends ask me, I'm from India, so I go back to India, and my friends always ask me, when I was in Maryland, "Hey, the Indian food over here tastes good, or the food in India?" You know, it's so ridiculous of a question, you know, that I oftentimes still try to make a sarcastic answer to it and say that, yeah, the food over here is good for what it is. But where I'm going with all of this is that it is a very straightforward answer, that the more native you are, the more your DevOps process will function in a more single unit manner. And the more you segregate your DevOps, the sooner you leave Salesforce for another DevOps process or anything, no matter even if it looks seamless through an App Exchange applet or a UI, it's still kind of different things happening under the scene, which do not correlate with your Salesforce pieces. And those are the kind of issues that come up when you're going a little bit too early off platform of Salesforce, right? A little bit about DevOps Center. I didn't have a better picture, so I just kind of stole this from wherever I could find one. But essentially, the idea about the DevOps Center was around the kind of taking away all of the capabilities of chain set, turning DX into like something of a visual component such that you can see which sandbox has what and everything. The automating the CI/CD pipeline in a low-code configurable manner, But beyond that, you still for this need, at least when I was doing the trailhead for this, you have like 3 or 4 different roles defined of like who's going to move certain things. It's a good product, and it basically works around the same architecture of how currently you would do it with DX, But instead of VS Code, you are using, Salesforce declarative. The intent is still the issue, which is essentially you need a completely different approach to DevOps when it comes to source code driven DevOps, because the long story of it is that, any kind of like relativity and the context that you want to bring in, it can only happen if you understand how the SaaS model has been built, including the standard objects and other things, and how Salesforce really works. It has some limitations currently, such as like it is only, and this could have changed, but it only kind of connects currently to Git. It also, I've heard this is kind of both ways. Now I'm hearing is that a beta version has come out where like they don't connect with Jira previously, but maybe that has kind of changed recently. But at a very high level, what I've noticed about this is that it is good for what it is, but it still probably requires some kind of like CI/CD tool, posture management, security threat management. There is connectivity with Shield, but you're talking again about another technology connecting those two Salesforce technologies together, and many other things, right? Just a little bit, lastly, to leave you with like what I am hearing from the industry about the DevSecOps worlds. What are client interests? One is shift right testing. So they have realized that once in a DevOps maturity model, we will talk. I've skipped over a lot about like what other speakers are going to speak about, such as shift left testing, which is like test-based development methodologies. But shift right testing is where you're monitoring and proactively finding issues where there could be any kind of DevOps kind of issues in any environment, or any hot fixes. Oftentimes, eliminating the need for hot fixes entirely, so that you can have everything in a controlled environment from end to end. AI and machine learning, this is kind of already embedded with so many apps out there, but I'm pretty sure Salesforce itself is creating so many and released so many of these capabilities now. The next one is DevSecOps as a service. This has become very common. So oftentimes, when we kind of do project methodologies and other things, we say like, oh, testers, project managers, and we bucket some hours and say, this is what is needed. But now a lot of team members have realized that DevSecOps as a service is great because there is a build phase of it. There is an ideation design phase of it. It itself is like a kind of like a governance model or a framework that our clients are requesting and asking us to bring more of. So think on those areas, because where I'm going with this thing is that no matter what part of the journey of Salesforce you are in, whether you started Salesforce as an admin, you're a CTA, you're an architect, you're a customer, you're an SI partner, there are opportunities in this area if you're still delving in the DevOps space. With that, I will just open it up for any questions or anything about the presentation. If not, then any questions with any kind of like client stories or client issues or anything that you were curious about, like what are some of the things, or? For yes. So in my previous few sessions, I had put together an entire end-to-end design of, you have static code analysis, for example, which is kind of looking at it offline, and doing all the peer reviews, conflict management stuff. There are tools like SonarQube and others. But where I'm going with this is that more than looking at it from a tools perspective, because there will always be tools, and everybody will come up with saying, this is a DevOps tool. But whenever I hear somebody saying this is a DevOps tool, I'll give you an example. App Omni, which is for security posturing, is a DevOps tool. Jenkins is a DevOps tool. Flosum is a DevOps tool. Copado is a DevOps tool. And then I'm a CIO who's like, I don't know what is DevOps, and I don't know which tool is best. And correct. And where I'm going with this is that I think more importantly, in tool selection for any architectural decision, including for the solution, it is first key to understand like how are you framing your problem. And the problem is that if you don't see it as a culture, which is going to keep repeating on a cyclical basis, for you to repeat the same processes of delivering a solution, as the end result, you will keep facing the same issues, and those issues will exponentially either become worse or better. And you want the latter, you know. And how do you get the latter? It's by first using some sophistication with tools. Then as you have your things fine, well defined, and people are skilled and everything is going fine, and the tool is outliving its own novelty, you remove it, you know, and you can take on more, you know. But I hope that answers. From a tool perspective, there are lots of tools, but I oftentimes ask people to like frame like what capabilities do you want in DevOps, and then select tools, because then you will see like a list of 1,000 tools in DevOps. Yeah. So, you know, I feel like the AI part, you bring up a good point. It's just like AI part is like, again, it's going to impact DevOps the same way it impacts our own culture. Like we already heard from Girish, like how coding will be all done by AI, you know, through autopilot and whatnot. Imagine if that happens, what happens to the peer review process? What happens to code conflicts? What happens to version control? What happens to other things? So that is something where we will need another AI, machine learning, governance around it, so that just like we are overseeing our developers and our development team, we're also overseeing the capabilities of AI and machine learning when it comes to automated DevOps. You know, so areas in that, it's still kind of areas that are maturing, but I think like people are putting their money on these three things is where I was going with the, you know, the three. My clients are interested in many other things. They're also asking like which tools to buy, but I always kind of see like summary, these are the three areas that they want. Good question. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Thank you. You had mentioned source-driven versus org-driven. Is there any space for a hybrid of both? I just ask because, you know, perhaps someone is putting source-driven development into, say, a Scratch org or something like that, and then someone else goes in there, makes declarative changes, and you're using that source-driven. Can you mix and match at all, or do you completely think that's wrong?
Good question. I'll try to see if I can summarize so I can answer it better. Is that basically, can you have a combination of org-based development methodology and source-driven development methodology? The answer is yes, you can have it. The answer also is that if you have it, it's more complex. The key part is that when you kind of are doing org-based development, that means that you are kind of storing all of your code in a Salesforce environment. In the source code-driven development, you are storing in a non-Salesforce GitHub repository as like really merely a form of code. So if somebody opens up that XML format, package.xml, they see all these name value pairs and they're like, what does it do, right? The challenge becomes is that if you ever try to kind of merge some of this, like where you're doing source code driven something, and you will always have to remember that, respect that, and kind of do it every single time, one or the other or both together. So it could actually, double up the effort, but you can do it, to answer your question. And one key part about that is also that when a source code, in the case of org-based methodology, the code really remains in the state in which Salesforce can use it, because the org is already using it, has all of these. So there are like some pre-steps and post-steps. Yeah, right? And how do you manage that? Because with the source-driven methodology, those pre-steps and post-steps are still needed. So you have to do that for that, but then you also have to remember that, hey, this one is actually moving it from this org and so forth. But yeah, those would be the challenges that I would think. Yeah.
Did you have a question? You speak to a lot of customers.
Mm-hmm.
So from the customers who don't adopt DevOps in the right way, either the process or the culture or the tooling, what is the negative impact you see on the business You spoke a lot about it, but if you could summarize that from a business perspective at a high level, that would be great.
Yeah. No, great question. A lot of times, honestly, it is failed projects, failed trust in IT. Then, like, there's also a little bit stronger division between business and IT. That's number one I see. Number two is definitely the cost of losing opportunities because your project is delayed and whatever benefits you are going to get out of that, whether you're launching a product or not, you're not going to be able to do it. Two is that, rollback options and troubleshooting. Things go wrong. A lot of times these days, security, and we are expecting that out of like very critical solutions such as healthcare, which has our PII data security and other parts. We're requiring faster improvements to those. But imagine when your DevOps is bad and when you're making any improvements, two things that can happen. One, you kind of like restrict some users from not using it, or the worst one, which is you allow users that are not allowed to use the data. And I'm seeing some of that from a security being a completely missed aspect in DevOps and the solution process. And lastly, just from a cost perspective, I think I've seen a lot of my clients regret not having a DevOps tool before because they have always underestimated how easy it would be because they have heard about Salesforce. Now they're hearing about DevOps Center and they're saying, hey, let's stop everything. Let's do this. And then when we are kind of looking at it, we're like, well, we were doing this with VS Code anyways. But I mean, by the way, I'm no way bashing DevOps Center. And I think it has a long road for maturity. But there are tools outside who have matured over the years that they have been working with Salesforce. I think those elements are still missing. And I think Salesforce will benefit highly if like they had a more robust tool and robust capability. And they could send that message out that this is all good, but you may need a little bit more, which is kind of a missed expectation oftentimes I'm seeing with many of my clients. Yeah.
DJ, I had a question. Could you tell me who would be buyers of DevSecOps as a service? I'm just curious if you could expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So oftentimes, this as a service is kind of like packaged from, starting with like the whole shift left mentality where you're setting up a DevSecOps security model. It's really more like the COE governance model. What is interesting is to see is that lately I've seen that because there is a multitude of technology stack, as well as processes all coming together, there's a center developing within the IT world, which is, hey, DevOps is DevOps. And how can we do faster? How can we do it better? How can we make sure that we do regression testing, penetration testing, all of that? So even in IBM, for example, we have this X-Force service, which essentially is a consortium of different kind of testing methodology, different kind of testing capabilities that we provide as a separate service to all our clients, saying, because one DevOps doesn't fit any one particular client, here's a mix and match, almost like a Chipotle of services that you can have. And this is helping the clients break down the silo mentality of saying, hey, DevOps is this one thing that takes a lot of money. Maybe they have a small team and they just need they have one admin who can just do DevOps and a smaller team. You might kind of get a different service as a managed service for those. You might have another one which is for like hybrid services, another one for global, another one for, and add the tool sets according to that. For example, I would not recommend like for an org with let's say like 100 users with like maybe changes made once in 6 months to buy and invest in a big DevOps practice. But on the other hand, like I've seen like clients who have like 20 orgs, for 20 different things, and none of this is connected to any kind of DevOps tool. And they even have like 5 different DevOps tool. Some they have Copado somewhere, they have Flosum somewhere, they have other things. And I'm like, what is going on? It's Salesforce. It's one thing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like a little bit metaphysical, I believe. Like Salesforce is connected. We are all multi-tenant and it works one way. And DevOps has to be a little bit more tightly integrated with the right kind of setting. That's what I meant.
So would it be smaller organizations that don't necessarily have the capacity or resourcing to allocate towards a a DevOps solution would opt for a solution like IBM's to come in and say, we can basically take ownership of your DevOps process. Am I reading that correctly? Am I off base?
I think it's just that different flavors of it, meaning just like there are multitude of cultures, if we see DevOps as a culture, it has to kind of fit your geographical location, your culture of your skills of your people. For example, I'll give you a quick example just to mean that. There was a particular client who was doing CPQ implementation, another one that was doing marketing cloud implementation. And we were thinking of DevOps. Now, guess which DevOps is better for CPQ implementation versus marketing cloud implementation versus like Salesforce implementation? Where it comes down to is that we created 3 service packages, one that applies to marketing cloud, one that applies to CPQ, but they were kind of decoupled, cohesive plans that sit together as one DevOps practice. And this was helpful because in marketing cloud, for example, they had different business units, and they wanted to ensure that all the business units have different campaigns and other things, and different kind of a setup for all of the DevOps. It suited them, but we were able to kind of style that, kind of create the stories, tag them, classify them, as well as create some DevOps process threads that were different. They were not the same for marketing cloud as they were for CPQ, as for they were sales. And when we kind of created that, we started creating templates of these DevOps practices and ensured that those were provided as a service. That's just one element, but you can kind of take like the number of users, the consumption, the number of orgs, the size of the project, the life of the project, the scalability of the project, but taking different dimensions, creating DevOps practices that cater primarily to that, or what works for you. But don't assume that because Salesforce has so many different products and it's Salesforce, that one DevOps practice, the way it is framed in Baybock or any other methodology or any other style, will just work. You'll have to, and primarily it is around tools and processes, not so much around like the delivery or the agile methodology or anything. You might have to use, example, Informatica. You might have to use a different tool to test like some of the capabilities, whether it is an MDM or a data warehouse or an ESB, and you can't do deployment or development around that just, by connecting it to one DevOps tool. Sometimes it's manual, sometimes it's, different. So just kind of thinking through those and taking those into consideration as a service and providing that as a service in different packages. All right. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, I'll still be behind. Yeah.